Our next reader is someone you probably all know pretty well, and I'm going to just make a few impromptu remarks here. I'm very proud. Richard Bank is debuting his novel Feig, and your classmate Tara Smith worked very hard on this, and Sarah Eldridge, right. I knew I was going to say the wrong Sarah, who is a student in the publishing program, did the design and layout for this book. And it's under our imprint at Philadelphia Stories, PS Books, so I'm really happy. And this is it. It's like just literally brand new books now, right off the presses. So, anyway, so now I get to introduce Richard. Richard D. Bank is the author of 6 books, including Everything Guide to Writing Nonfiction. He's a past president and current board member of the Philadelphia Writers Conference and has published over 100 articles, essays, short stories, and book reviews in various journals and periodicals. Richard has taught writing courses at the University of Pennsylvania, Temple University, and other venues. He currently is on the faculty at Rosemont College in the graduate publishing and MFA programs, where he teaches courses including creative nonfiction and publishing law. Richard provides services as a writing coach for serious writers. His first novel, Feig, is published now by PS Books and is due out any day, and that day has come. So, thanks, Richard.
For the next 2 minutes, I have to thank you, Carl, and
She's back.
there. Oh, okay. There you go. Really, thanks so much. And I got to tell everybody, working with PS Books has been incredible. It's the best experience I've ever had. So, and I literally just saw it tonight. So, forgive me if I'm a little excited. And just to give it a plug, I say this sincerely. It is on Amazon. If you're so inclined, go there. If you want to get the book, write a review. Yeah. And keep in mind, and also I'm not on Facebook, but probably everyone else here is. And I'm going to start a campaign where I'm just going to people individually saying, go tell your Facebook friends, get the word out. Let's make this be a big success, because Philadelphia Stories is an NPO. I literally seen for 10 years, right?
Yep.
It's mind-boggling what they've accomplished. So this will help support this and everything else they put out. Support it. So please do that. I mean that. Anyway, I'm going to do something a little different tonight. I will read a little bit from this, and give me an extra 2 minutes maybe. I want to first tell you a story that I've never told anyone, and I'm probably not going to repeat after tonight. 20 years ago, I received a phone call from someone I had no idea who he was. His name was Paul. And he wanted to know if I would help him with his writing. He was a Holocaust survivor from Hungary, and actually never was in the camps. He escaped. And he had been in Israel, and he had translated some work from another survivor from Hungarian into English in Israel, and he wanted to do it here in the United States where he now lived, and would I help him? I said, why'd you call me? I was just starting, I was writing a bit, but I was just starting out, and he said, well, you wrote a review about a book about a hidden child in the Holocaust, which I had done, and it was a local woman, and I'd actually met her, and he said, maybe it would help me. And I thought, well, I really got a lot to do. I'm a lawyer still, and this and that, and I don't know you. And long story short, we did meet several times, and he spoke in a little of an accent, a very strong guy on the outside. I've just never, it just stuck with me all this time, and I always thought there was something about him inside that wasn't getting out. And I took him 6 months to stop calling him Mr. Bank, and finally it was Richard, and anyway. And there he was. And after a couple of years of trying to help, the publishing industry, nothing came of it. But he was there in my mind. And 5 or 6 years later, I started to write Feig. It is not Paul's story, but Feig gave birth to Paul, or rather the other way around. Paul gave birth to Feig. And every time I sat and visualized Feig, I kept thinking about Paul. And I share this with you because you just don't know. You don't know when you turn something, a body away, or go out and look and see what's out there in the world and say, hey, gee, because if it wasn't for Paul, no Feig, none at all. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is read some. I'm probably not going to repeat this again, by the way. Not that there's anything libelous. And I actually got to a point I thought, my God, because I hadn't thought about it for so long. I teach libel law, privacy law, plagiarism. Have I taken stuff, and what have I? And thankfully, I kept a file on him, and I checked, and my God, his actual story is totally different than Feig's. But still, Paul and Feig are like that in my mind. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to read something because that I've never read before in public. I haven't read until it's been about 15 or 16 years at least that I read this. And I just pulled it out this week in anticipation of tonight to show you a little about the writing process. This is about a page and a half that Paul wrote that he asked me to read. I am then going to read you about a page and a half from something in Feig, and there's a reason. So this is Paul, okay? That is his name, Paul. It was a sunny morning in June 1944. I believe it was also a Sunday. We, the boys of the 101-320 Work Brigade of the Jewish Forced Labor Service, recently drafted, were brought up from the country to the vicinity of Budapest. Our bivouac wore the wagons on the side track of a great railway yard, and most of us stood there scattered. Officially, we were part of the Hungarian army, but as Jews unarmed, not in uniform, but organized in auxiliary work brigades. Trains were coming and going. We paid little attention to them until a very long train passed by. The entire train consisted of cattle wagons, tiny ventilation openings, barbed wire, and inside anxious faces. The deportation of the Jews from the provinces was at its peak. In those cattle wagons were the Hungarian Jews heading for Auschwitz, squeezed inside like sardines. Outside each wagon, on the small platform or hanging onto rail or ladder, a Hungarian gendarme with rifle loaded. As the train traveled through the railway yard with the regulation slow speed, we saw the faces of our Jewish brethren, locked inside like cattles, peeling through those barbed wire ventilation shafts. We couldn't exchange words. What is this? What is going on? Where are you being taken? We just stood there rooted to the ground. Those inside saw us and knew who we were, Jewish labor battalionists, co-religionists doomed together. As the train sped by and we stand there bewildered from the sight, I remember a young religious man with glasses, beard, hat, who may have been a young Orthodox rabbi, yelling to us one word, the name of the town from which his and other wagons' passengers was taken from, Kataslaka. A few other such names of places is also yelled out to us from the passing train, though those tiny barbed wired openings. Then, as the long train gathers speed, a tiny platform stands a young mother with a few weeks-old baby in her arm. A beautiful young Jewish mother, dressed in the normal peasant garb, barefooted, looking like a typical young peasant, holding her tiny child, by some miracle permitted to ride this death train on the platform and not inside, seeing us and crying out for water. One of our boys, for God's sake, give us some water. And in her arm, her tiny child may be dying if not already dead. As we stand there, we take up the cry and yell to the gendarmes, give them water. On the following wagon, a young military policeman hears us and nods with some understanding, even sympathy, and gives the expression that soon the train will come to a halt and water will be distributed. I held a tiny tin in my hand. It may have been liver pate. But along with the train, as the last wagons pass and throw it inside through the opening. The train has left the yard, gathers speed, and disappears with its doomed cargo forever. Today there were human beings. That young mother with her weeks-old baby, thirsty, the young rabbi telling us where he and his Haver were taken from. In a few days, they, the young peasant mother with her child, are pariahs, martyrs, the immortals of the 6 million Jews. Now, I read that, like I said, a long time ago, and I put it away, and I never thought about it much again, but the material as a way of staying in the unconscious, we were talking about this in our class tonight, in the brain. So this is a little piece from Feig, and I'm done. This is Feig speaking. It was mid-afternoon and unusually hot. Feig continued in a more subdued tone. The sun burned in the sky and my skin turned red. Trains had been coming and going like a steady stream, but one arrived which drew our attention because it stood out from the rest. The train consisted entirely of cattle cars. Barbed wire ran across the small openings on the sides. Behind the barbed wire we saw faces, human faces, pressed to the screens, noses and lips, some gushing blood from being sliced by the wire, protruded like cow snouts, sniffing for a whiff of freedom. David, I just could not understand what the people were doing in those cattle cars, nor what could be so terrible inside that drove them to risk gashing their faces for a bit of fresh air and sunshine. Of course, now I know. Feig sighed and once more lolled his head in my direction, and once again I just kept my eyes fixed onto the dark ceiling. When the transport came to a standstill, continued Feig, the faces began to scream. As I said, it was very hot, and inside the cattle cars it must have been an inferno. Like everybody else, I stopped what I had been doing and stared at those wretched souls. I just could not comprehend what their crime had been to justify the way they were being treated. Then I learned the nature of their crime, sneered Feig. I couldn't see his crooked grin, but I had seen it often enough, and I was certain his lips were pressed tight and twisted, because this is what he always did when his rancorous side took over. Once the shouting became more distinct, Feig went on, we recognized they were yelling in Yiddish. The frantic eyes behind the openings focused upon us. They knew we were Jews because of the Star of David in our jackets. And then I knew my landslight's only crime was being Jewish. They began to shout for water. I was standing near a bucket filled with water. I was too afraid to do anything. Though only a few weeks in the labor brigade, I knew that the best way to stay alive was to be invisible. Any move to attract attention might just be enough to strike the fancier women of a gendarme or Nazi officer to shoot you dead. But then I saw the face of a sweet little girl who reminded me of my younger sister. She was staring at me with pleading eyes. I shall never forget her as long as I live. She said nothing, she was silent, but I knew what she wanted. In the bucket there was a ladle that I filled with water. When the guard closest to me wasn't looking, I darted to the cattle car, transporting the girl. By the time I reached her, I spilled half of the water, but she slurped up the rest as I tilted the ladle against the slot. I asked her where she was from. You can imagine my shock when she said Siget. I looked at this girl, dark eyes in deep sockets. Her black hair was matted and her face smudged with soot, and who knows what else. And she smelled horribly. Worse than the shit of cattle or people. It was a smell I couldn't place, but one I would become familiar with soon enough. I started yelling at the girl, demanding to know she knew my mother and sister, but before she could say anything, whoever had been holding her up released her and she disappeared from the opening, to be replaced by bobbing heads struggling to take her place. I dropped the ladle and ran shouting for my father, screaming that the train was carrying people from Siget, which was Feig's hometown. Thinking about this, I just had a thought, and that's what I'll share with you at the end. Again, as one writer to other writers, in creative nonfiction, we always talk about, I try to teach, don't turn fiction, something made up, into the truth. That's not what you're supposed to do. But if you're writing fiction, really good fiction, important fiction, sometimes you do the reverse. You take the truth, you make it fiction, and you really say something. Thanks a lot, and thanks again for listening.